This is your toast with the most, Tyler and Toast. Let's talk about randomness in video games. What is randomness? Is it a bad thing? Casual versus competitive? Luck versus skill? Varied experience versus total chaos? Is it avoidable? Specifically in PvP. In the background, you guys are seeing some Titanfall 2 gameplay on the Coleseum. This was a 1v1 game mode. I thought it was very fitting for the topic I'm talking about. You and your opponent each have identical loadouts. You both have an energy rocket-propelled launcher of sorts. Phase shift, so you phase into another dimension for a couple seconds and you can't be damaged, you can't be seen, you can kind of see a trail behind you though. And then 2 frag grenades that'll replenish over time. Basically just focuses on movement, focuses on accuracy, outperforming, outplaying, kind of like outthinking your opponent. You can run on the glass wall around the Coliseum, although I didn't do that in any of these matches. It's a best of 5. Hope you guys enjoy the gameplay. Hope you guys enjoy the commentary. If you do, give it a thumbs up. Here we go. Let's talk about some randomness. I think that we can break down PvP games into 2 broad categories. It's either skill-based or luck-based. Luck-based obviously having a more focus on randomness, and skill-based obviously focusing on your raw skills. The more randomness you have, the more opportunity for the better player to lose. And if the better player loses, is your game really a test of skill, or is it a test of luck? But if the game you're playing has elements of luck in it, or relies solely on randomness or heavily on randomness, does that make it a bad game? I would say no, not necessarily. It really depends on what your game is trying to do. If you're playing, let's say, Yahtzee, well, Yahtzee is based primarily on luck. Sure, there's some push your luck, you can play the statistics, but in the end, you're rolling dice. Does that make it a bad game? No, Yahtzee's fun. But when you're playing PvP in video games, you have to ask yourself, what is this game's goal? Is the goal of this game for every player that plays to be able to have the most fun possible? Or is the goal of this game to allow the better players to rise to the top? Are people comparing stats? Are they bragging about how good they did? Is there an esports scene? That would be totally different than the first example. A casual PvP experience with a little more focus on luck and a competitive PvP experience with more focus on skill, I think can both exist and should both exist. But for me, I would rather have the more competitive experience, because if I'm going to develop skill assets and do well, I don't want to feel like I'm getting cheated because I was better than them, but because of XYZ fill in the blank randomness that just happened, I lost, and that's just not fair to me. Even so, there will always be some level of randomness in games, just because of the way algorithms work and the way things are programmed. I mean, take lag time for example, take outside influences, like maybe I'm playing some competitive esports game in a tournament setting and the 3 people on my team are sick. That's random and it's not gonna help, but that's an outside force. Randomness will always exist, whether it's outside the game or inside the game. There's gonna be some level of randomness in there. So it exists, but how do we address it to highlight skill rather than chance? Let's look at poker for an example. Poker has a competitive scene, but it's one of the most random games out there. The worst player could beat the best player, but that's not how you play poker. It's played over a series of multiple games. You can't be sure of the absolute value of any move, but the best players are going to find the small ways to up that percentage. That's all fine and dandy if you're playing poker, or if you're a professional gamer and you're playing in a round-robin tournament, or you're playing in a league leading up to a bigger tournament. What about you? What about me? The people that play in our own homes, that play games on a single game basis, what do we do? How do we deal with randomness? First things first, we're going to have to recognize that there's a difference between having to quickly think and strategize to adjust to something that just happened versus his is just better than mine. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. To quickly react and strategize about something is to recognize that, hey, I have a submachine gun, he has an assault rifle, I'm going to close the gap. I'm going to put him in an unfair advantage. Yes, that's unfair, but you caused that to happen. Your skill made that unfairness. His being better than mine is just like, oh, I'm going to open up a supply drop, I'm going to get super lucky, and I'm going to get this weapon that's 10% better in damage, 50% better in recoil. It's got 20 extra bullets in the magazine, and every other Joe Smo has just the base weapon that's inferior in every way. There's a difference between those two. We need to recognize that, and we need to gravitate away from the games that kind of more focus on just like, oh, a pay to win or what have you. And then when you recognize something in the game that he's using, maybe that weapon is better in every situation except for this one. Let me put myself in this situation so I can put him at an unfair advantage. I also think there's such a thing as a neutral randomness. Neutral randomness would be something like wind in baseball or a muddy field in football. Let's take Battlefield for an example. Battlefield has dynamic weather. The weather patterns in that game are random. There could be a dust storm this game, there might not be. It might be raining this game, it might not be. And those affect the game in different ways, but they affect the game equally for both sides. However, depending on the situation that you're in, if you're an attacker and there's a huge dust storm going in that neither team can really see what's going on, I would say that the attacker has the advantage because they're going to be able to push up because the defenders can't see them. Now, while the defenders have that same thing going on, they're defending, they're not trying to move, they're trying to just stay there and pick off the team. They're kind of at a disadvantage at that point, but I would say that that's a neutral randomness that is okay, in my opinion. Then you've got something that I would call a dynamic randomness. Titanfall 2's attrition game mode drops AI grunts onto the field. Both teams have to try to kill the other AI grunts. That's random in terms of how the grunts interact with the map and interact with the players. They're programmed to be identical in every way, but they're going to react differently based on the status of the field. And I would say a dynamic randomness adds a little dynamic, a little variety, a little controlled randomness, if you will, to the game. And while it's not for every game or every game mode, I think that that kind of randomness is okay and doesn't make any one team or any one side lopsided or unfair. And lastly, you have what I would call unavoidable randomness. This is the lag, this is the outside forces that I was talking about earlier. But on top of that, you've been aiming down a doorway with half a clip in your weapon, just waiting on this guy to come. You wait 20 seconds and then you reload and then he pops out every single time that happens. You know what I'm talking about. Unavoidable randomness. Let's say you're playing a game of Battlefield and you spawn in at the very beginning of the game and you decide that you want to push D because the majority of your team stayed back at A. You decide to hop in a vehicle and lo and behold 4 other teammates hop in with you. Well, now you've got yourself a solid push to D. So now you're at D with your squad and you're continually capping it. A couple of enemies rush up the hillside only to get mowed down instantly because you guys are fortified at D. Since the majority of your team stayed back, the enemies now have flag G, flag F, and flag C. You opt to go for one of those flags instead of defending D. You and your squad hit a left flank towards G only to get spotted from a sniper 500 meters away who marks you, making the enemy aware of your presence. Some of the enemies close by decide to cut you off and end up killing you. Now, at any point during this scenario, you could have decided to go to any other flag. Your teammates at the very beginning could have all rushed to different flags instead of the home flag. That would have changed what you thought about the game and what you thought you should do. You could have decided to run there instead of taking that vehicle. The enemies could have decided to fly a plane over D and then parachute down and get there before you did. When you killed all those people that were rushing up the hill at D, they could have been more competent than you. The people in your squad could have been Johnny No Thumbs, and in a perfect scenario, they should have won, but they didn't. Everything affects everything else, and people, even if they make the optimal choice, which there could be multiple choices that are good or multiple choices that are optimal, they might not make that choice. They might choose to ignore some sort of information over here, or they didn't catch that information. Whatever's going on affects everything else, and there's too much going on for you to really realize and strategize everything that's going on. So this is what unavoidable randomness is, and you can't get rid of it. That's what makes PvP so good. Every game is different every single time. People are gonna play in a different way every single time and react or choose not to react or make different choices or aim at the sky when they should have aimed at the person. I do that all the time. I have such bad potato aim. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of the different kinds of randomness I talked about in PvP video games. My name's Tyler Toast. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like, subscribe for more, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.